We often make the function of TI synonymous with logic, which might not be the most accurate thing to do. Perhaps the positioning of TI in your function stack represents the extent to which you want to align yourself with logic. If you have introverted thinking as your dominant function, so an INTP or an ISTP, then you're going to feel this need to be logically consistent in your assertions and your actions. And you'll be extremely cognizant of moments where you might be slipping up in this area. Introverted thinking versus extroverted thinking. The problem with equating TI with logic too much is that the function of TE is not illogical. TI versus TE can be thought of as an understanding versus utility distinction. Does it make sense versus does it work? Let me give you a strange and probably bad example. In physics, you have classical Newtonian physics, where things can be calculated in a predictable way. Then you have the other side, which is quantum physics, which tells us that the universe is, or might be, fundamentally random at its core. Now, both of these sides of physics work. They make testable predictions about the world, which turn out to be accurate and endlessly useful. However, they're currently not reconciled with each other. They can't be combined. A TE mindset might think, so they both work. They both do the job. If there's a benefit to combining them, which there is, then go for it. But not having them be unified is not a problem in and of itself. A more TI mindset would want to bring them together and discover the essential core underneath that unites the both of them. I'm going to have loads of INTJ physicists in the comments saying that they're working on this exact problem. I know, bad example. Nonetheless, it can be useful in illustrating the difference between TI and TE. TE users are asking, does a thing work? TI users are asking, how and why does a thing work? TE can be much more outcome focused, whereas TI is much more explorative. A TI user is going to want to find out why something works, even if there isn't necessarily a tangible or obvious benefit to knowing that. That's not to say that TE users are always going to be outcome focused and can't explore things of interest to them, or that TI users can't be pragmatic. Both of those things can very much be the case, but as a general rule, TE is about utility and usefulness, whereas TI is more about understanding and breaking down, framework creation. I've said this on many occasions, but TI users are framework builders. In this case, it's a logical framework, and one that can be used in a pretty practical way, actually. For example, personality types would be a framework to understand people. There are these principles underlying the system, such as the functions. They occur in a certain order, have certain definitions, etc. Although these frameworks can sometimes seem very rigid, they're often updated. It's just that things need a good logical reason in order to be there and be included. Then, once the system exists, such as with personality types, it can help you navigate through the world and interact with people better, or understand yourself better. TI is sometimes described as subjective. Although I've never really liked that description of it, I can see where they're coming from in some respects. There are probably lots of people that have never heard about personality types, yet have their own classifications for people. These groupings of traits that seem to come together. Someone has a big strength, which results in a corresponding opposite weakness. So they've kind of developed their own system, which is very common for TI users. In that way, it could be thought of as individual and subjective, because it's not conforming to some kind of external standard. It's useful and sometimes personalized to the individual. Whereas a TE user might seek an external system and improve it if necessary, TI users tend to all have their individual and unique systems that are a combination or hodgepodge of different things they've looked into over time. When I say framework, it can best be viewed as an interconnected series of principles and rules. When you boil something down to its essence, it needs to be stored in some kind of way. Rules and principles are one of the best ways to do this. TI users want to reduce complexity, but without losing any essential aspect of it. It's about encapsulating something and creating what often amount to elegant summaries of things. Although by definition a rule is a fixed or rigid thing, TI users see them more as starting points. Let's say you have a chord on the piano, and you have this simple rule or principle that says a chord is made up from 3 notes. Easy, but that isn't job done. That rule is a starting point, a launch pad. For example, an implication would be that if a chord is 3 notes, then you can play those 3 notes in different orders. You start with a simple formula, then you can extrapolate outwards from that. So you could go from this to this. The simple chord at the start and the complex arpeggio at the end have the exact same underlying principle to them. Now imagine the process but in the reverse order. Imagine hearing that complex arpeggio and trying to find out the underlying principle behind it. Taking something more complex and reducing it down. That's what TI wants to do. Imagine a blackboard full of complex equations, eventually being condensed down to a simple and elegant formula. Or in this case, a complex arpeggio being simplified down to a single chord. Although the manifestations of these things are very different, the underlying idea is the same. That is almost always what TI wants to get at. And it's applicable to almost any area of life. Searching for that nugget, that summary, that rule, principle, or formula. But like I said, it's not a rigid thing. For one, you could just come to the wrong conclusion, which happens all the time. Your formulas might be wrong. But it's more so that when you have these principles, they can suddenly be applied in different ways. I'm going to mention the types that have TI in their top 4 functions: INTPs and ISTPs. Everything I've said so far applies to them as well, but of course TI is used differently depending on the surrounding functions. INTPs can generate new ideas and perspectives, which feed the creation of this TI framework. And ISTPs do the same, but they tend to be much more practical and grounded in the information and experiences they use to build their systems. Let me put it this way. ISTPs are less speculative than INTPs with what they choose to accept and take in. INTPs could have logical systems in certain areas that are totally hypothetical. It's definitely a mistake, though, to think that INTPs and ISTPs are simply the intuitive and sensor versions of each other, because INTPs have SI as their third function and ISTPs have NI as their third function. So they like to use, indulge, and satisfy those functions. ENTPs and ESTPs. Both of these types use TI as a tool to facilitate their dominant function. I've seen both of these types get into quite chaotic situations or actively bring them about. There is a lot to be gained from living this way if you can somehow ride the storm. Their second slot TI is like their secret weapon. It makes sure that there's this underlying pragmatism they possess. Both types like to exert themselves upon the world and experience a great deal of variety from it. Their second slot TI makes them able to assess situations and people well, especially when they're encountering unusual and novel things. When you come up against something new, the first question you're going to ask yourself often as a TI user: do I recognize any of the patterns or principles here? Does it fit in with what I already know? Can it be classified? If it doesn't, then it could be broken down and you might realize that some of the constituent parts or the way they fit together are analogous to other things you know. And in the case of these two types, if it's something totally new, then it's great. They're more than happy to take in this information, play with it, and keep it or discard it depending on whether they enjoy it or find it useful. ISFJs and INFJs. These guys are probably the most underrated TI users. Although it might not be as strong as the previous types mentioned, it's definitely extremely well used and valued by them. Having that balance between FE and TI can be very useful because you can dip into both sides of being. You can deliver logical insights in a way that won't be off-putting to people, which is often a problem the high TI users have. It makes them excellent communicators because they aren't leaning into charm and social skills too much and therefore have more tools to use. Although they can seem, and often are, very accepting and forgiving and non-judgmental, it's very difficult to pull the wool over their eyes. And in fact, they might be good at doing that to other people should they wish. That third slot TI is underrated and overlooked, and as a result, very underestimated in them. ENFJs and ESFJs. Both of these types are going to be imbalanced when it comes to this function. They're going to struggle to have those disagreeable moments and conversations where they're delivering the TI truth bomb. Harsh, cold, and detached logic is not a mode of operating that feels very comfortable to them at all. It's because it negates and goes against their main strength. They will, however, value this ability in other people, and as I've mentioned about the FE DOMs before, if they surround themselves with the right people, they can certainly pick up this skill and try to build on that weakness over time, often with great success. I decided to show my face again at the end of this video to ask you to like and subscribe. Now that is what we call dedication.